They called it a celebration. White tablecloths, golden uplights, the quiet clink of champagne glasses against the backdrop of a string quartet. 100 people gathered inside the Hawthorne Hotel's private ballroom that night to honor my father, Charles Blair, Executive Vice President of First Harbor Bank, for his 40 years of service and impeccable legacy. He looked the part. Silver hair, combed back navy suit, tailored to perfection, voice crisp and effortless as he stood at the head table raising his glass. To legacy, he said, to vision carried forward by those who understand it. The room hushed, attentive. I remember watching his eyes scan the crowd warm and easy as he nodded at board members, smiled at old colleagues. Then, just as I let myself believe I might not be invisible tonight, his gaze landed on me. His tone didn't change. My real children, he continued, are the ones who've made me proud. There was a pause, barely a breath, and then applause. Hands met hands around the room. Smiles, toasts, laughter. I didn't clap. I couldn't. Charles Blair was my father. Evelyn Blair was his youngest daughter. And in that moment, I knew I was neither legacy nor pride. I was something else entirely. Then across the room, he lifted his glass slightly again and said clearly enough for the laughter to quiet, "You can leave." Just that. 3 words. Enough to strip the air out of the room. I stood, slowly. My chair scraped the polished floor sharp against the silence. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood, and then beside me Daniel stood too. He didn't say anything. Not yet. But what he did next changed everything. When I was 8, my brother Greg won the state science fair. My father bought him a telescope so large it required its own tripod. The base was engraved. Gregory Blair, future engineer, it read. When I was 10, my sister Claire was selected for a junior medical summer program at Yale. She received a stethoscope, real not a toy, wrapped in tissue paper inside a velvet-lined box. When I was 12, I performed Debussy's Clair de Lune in our living room for my birthday recital. I practiced for weeks, memorizing every note, every pause. That afternoon, our neighbors and my father's colleagues gathered wine in hand, soft murmurs of polite expectation rising in the air. Halfway through, I missed 1 note. Just 1. My hands kept playing, but I heard it. And so did he. Charles Blair stood up, quietly, adjusted his tie, and walked out the front door. The music kept going, but the room fell still. My mother Helen gave me a small nod from across the piano, one of those silent nods that says, "Keep going." So I did. I finished the piece through a blur of tears, not knowing if anyone even clapped. That night, my gift was a book. No note. No inscription. Just a hard cover of great expectations placed quietly on my pillow. I knew what it meant. From the outside, we were the kind of family that belonged on magazine covers, colonial house with navy shutters, Sunday brunches, alumni decals on every bumper. Inside, we were something else. Greg became the future of finance. Claire Boston's prodigy in a lab coat. And me, I was the quiet one, the artistic one, the one who always read too much and spoke too little. If they were performance, I was background music. My mother tried in her way. She would find me sketching or writing poems and say, "You have something beautiful in you, Evelyn." But beauty didn't buy legacies. In our house, the currency of love was excellence. Measurable, polished, applause-worthy, and I had always come up short. When my mother died, no one in the house cried out loud. She passed in the spring of my sophomore year of college. Pancreatic cancer. Quiet, cruel. My siblings flew in for the service, wore the right colors, hugged the right people. Then they left. I stayed. The house felt different without her. Not emptier, just colder. The kind of cold that sinks into your skin when the heat is technically on, but no one remembers to adjust the thermostat. Charles. My father stopped using the living room entirely. Her chair stayed by the window untouched like a sealed exhibit, but no one looked at it, not even him. We never spoke of her again. Not when I brought it up. Not when I asked about how they met. Not even when I found the old wedding album buried in a closet. One evening over dinner, I told him I'd decided to study literature. I'd been accepted into the program at Vassar. He didn't look up from his plate. Then, you'll need to find a way to pay for it. That was it. No fight, no yelling. just a wall coming down brick by quiet brick. Greg had his Wharton tuition fully covered. Claire's med school bills were written off as investment, but for me there would be no legacy to inherit, no help, no questions asked. So I took out loans. Waited tables, sold first editions online when I had to. I studied Emily Dickinson by day and scrubbed bar glasses by night. At 19, I learned how to grieve two absences at once, the mother who left and the father who stayed but vanished anyway. We met in a used bookstore on a Wednesday afternoon. It was raining not dramatically, just steady enough to keep most people indoors. I was looking for a copy of The Age of Innocence with the original deckled edges. My hand reached for it at the same time as his. We both froze, then both pulled back. And then, for reasons I still can't explain, I said, "You take it." He smiled, not letting go of the book. "I already own it," he said, "but this one has your name in it." He was right. Inside the front cover, someone had scrawled in faded ink to Evelyn, "You'll understand this story someday. It wasn't from my family. The handwriting didn't match anyone I knew, but something about it felt familiar." We ended up talking for an hour in the philosophy aisle. His name was Daniel Harper. He was a software engineer by trade, but had a minor in comparative literature. He had dimples he didn't seem to know about, and eyes that didn't look through people they rested. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't tell me I was too sensitive or hard to read. He just listened. And when I told him in a too fast rush that my family didn't really talk to me, that I wasn't exactly chosen, he didn't flinch. He said, "Some people don't choose their people. They build them." It wasn't love at first sight. It was quieter than that. It was the first time in a long time that I didn't feel like I had to disappear. Daniel proposed with a first edition copy of Middlemarch. The ring was tucked into the hollowed-out center of the book, between chapters 21 and 22. He didn't kneel. He didn't recite a speech. He just opened the page, looked at me, and said, "We don't have to do this the way they do it. We can build something else." And we did. We lived in a small apartment above a florist in Somerville, one-bedroom crooked floors, windows that let in more sound than light. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and old paint. I loved it. That's where Salt Light Press was born. It started with 2 manuscripts, a memoir by a retired nurse who had worked the AIDS ward in the 80s, and a poetry collection from a woman who'd aged out of foster care. We printed each one in runs of 300, hand-bound them in craft covers, and drove them to local bookstores ourselves. We weren't rich, but the work felt honest, quiet, like we were returning voices to people who'd been written off. When we got married, it was in the reading room of the Cambridge Public Library. No aisle, no bouquet, just sunlight spines of old books and 20 people we trusted. Claire came my sister, but only for the ceremony. She wore a blazer that didn't wrinkle when she crossed her arms and left before cake. Later that night, she sent me a message. "Cute wedding. Hope it works out." My father didn't come. He never responded to the invitation. But Daniel held my hand the entire night. And when we danced quietly in a hallway near the reference desk, he whispered, "You're not background anymore. You're the whole melody." I didn't know how to believe that yet, but I wanted to. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday. No return address, but I recognized the seal, First Harbor Bank. For a second, I thought it was a mistake, a misrouted letter, maybe something for Greg. But when I opened it there, it was my name printed clearly at the top of the invitation. "Please join us in honoring Charles Blair on the occasion of his retirement. Formal dinner, business attire, RSVP required." There was no note, no signature, just the printed words and a date. Daniel looked at it from across the kitchen counter. "He didn't send this," he said. I know I replied. But he approved it. We stared at the card like it might speak. It had been over 3 years since I'd last heard from my father. Not a call when Salt Light got featured in the Atlantic. Not a message when my first collection won a local book award. Not even a forwarded email from Claire or Greg. Just this. And yet against all reason, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. What if he was trying in his own way? What if this dinner was a door, not wide open but cracked just enough? Daniel watched me closely. "You don't have to go," he said. but I was already turning the card over in my hand, searching for something it couldn't give me. Maybe this time. Maybe I wouldn't be invisible. The Hawthorne Hotel looked exactly how I remembered it, polished historical, too proud to show its age. We arrived early. Daniel wore the navy suit I loved, the one he only brought out for weddings, and moments he knew I might need armor. I wore a dark green dress and my mother's pendant, a small circle of amber set in silver. No one had seen it since her funeral. Inside the ballroom, a string quartet played Vivaldi. Staff in white gloves moved like clockwork, adjusting chairs, refilling glasses, making everything seamless. We checked in at the reception table. The woman behind the name tags paused. Evelyn Blair. She asked, double-checking the list. Blair Harper, I corrected gently. She handed me a card with Table 9 printed in gold foil. We followed the numbers. Table 9 was near the side wall behind a pillar partially obscured from the stage. The other seats were filled with second cousins, someone who might have been my father's assistant, and a man who asked if we were part of the catering team. Claire waved at us from across the room. She sat near the center beside Greg and his wife in view of the microphone. She didn't get up, just raised her glass a little, a gesture that said, "You made it this far. Don't ruin it." Dinner was served. Conversation spun around the tables. Stock portfolios, prep schools, second homes. No one asked about books. I excused myself once to the restroom just to breathe. In the mirror, I noticed my lipstick had faded. My hands were trembling. Back at the table, Aunt Judith appeared beside me. She wore pale lavender and too much perfume, the kind that clings to silk for days. She leaned in, her voice low. "Try to make him proud tonight, dear. Don't embarrass him." She patted my hand, like a warning dressed up as affection. When the room dimmed for the speech, my heart moved somewhere into my throat. Charles Blair rose from the head table like he'd done it 100 times before, smooth assured, the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention because it had always been given. He thanked the board, the firm, the clients. He even thanked Helen, my mother, calling her the quiet compass behind his years of clarity. I felt the tears before I knew they were there. Then came the part I hadn't let myself expect, but still hoped for. "My children," he began. "They've carried my values further than I ever dreamed." A pause. "Greg," he said, turning to my brother, "is a mind sharper than any market. Claire, what a miracle in motion. A healer, a builder." I waited, sat straighter, smoothed the skirt of my dress. Maybe he'd say something about Saltlight, about stories, about how value isn't always in numbers. But he looked over me like I was furniture. And then he smiled, raised his glass, and said it. "My real children are the ones who've made me proud." The applause came fast, too fast. Like no one knew what to do with the silence between those words. Daniel didn't clap. Neither did I. My father looked directly at me. No malice, no anger. Just that same clean clinical clarity he used for interest rates and bottom lines. Then he said, just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, "You can leave." 3 words. Not shouted, not whispered, just final. And for the first time in a very long time, I stood. The silence was the kind that made silverware stop moving. I stood unsure if I'd actually leave or just dissolve into the carpet. My fingers went cold, my ears rang. The room around me blurred faces I didn't know, faces I'd grown up with. Some looked away. Some didn't look at all. And then Daniel stood too. He didn't look at me first. He looked at my father. Then he reached for his water glass. Not champagne, not anything sparkling, and tapped it gently with his fork. Once. Twice. The sound echoed crisp against linen and tension. "May I?" he asked the room. No one answered. But no one stopped him. He turned slightly, his voice calm. "I'd like to offer a toast. Not to Charles, though I know this evening was meant to celebrate him. I want to toast Evelyn." My breath caught. Daniel continued, measured but certain. "This is a woman who read poetry to her mother every night in hospice care, even when her own heart was breaking. Who sold her personal books just to stay in school because her father said fairy tales weren't worth financing. who gave her brother money from her college savings when he nearly lost his job over a debt and never once asked for it back. A few people shifted. Greg didn't look up. She built a publishing house from nothing, one that gave a voice to people no one else would print. Foster kids, grieving nurses, forgotten veterans. If that's not legacy, I don't know what is. His voice didn't rise. He wasn't performing. He was telling the truth aloud for the first time in front of people who had never cared to listen. You may not see her, but I do. He turned to me, then eyes steady. You're not invisible. You never were. No one clapped, but no one stopped us either when he took my hand. We walked out of that ballroom with no applause, no fanfare, just the steady weight of our own dignity returned. The cold air outside bit at my skin, but I didn't feel small anymore. I felt tired, released. Daniel didn't say anything until we reached the car. Then softly, like he didn't need me to believe it, just to hear it, he said, "That room isn't where your worth ever lived." And for once, I believed him. I didn't leave the apartment for 3 days. Daniel offered Silence Tea a warm palm on my back when I couldn't catch my breath. He never asked me to explain. That, in itself, felt like a kind of grace. The morning of the 4th day, there was a knock. It was Judith, my father's older sister. She stood on the porch, holding a small leather photo album and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "I thought you might want these," she said. "And I brought scones. They're too dry, but they make decent company." We sat at the kitchen table, the album unopened between us. She sipped tea, then looked at me without blinking. "He wasn't always like that, you know. Your father." I said nothing. Judith sighed, then reached over and opened the album. Inside were photos I'd never seen. My mother holding me as a newborn. My father, younger, smiling, actually smiling as he tossed toddler me into the air at a lake I couldn't name. "He changed," she said quietly. "After Helen got sick. After he lost the version of life he thought he could control." I traced a photo of the 3 of us side by side on a blanket. My mother looked tired. My father's hand rested gently on her shoulder. "He couldn't fix it," Judith whispered. So he decided to master what was left. I didn't forgive him in that moment, but something in me unclenched, not because he deserved it, because I did. The voicemail came on a Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry in the quiet when the notification buzzed. Unknown number, but the voice was unmistakable. "Evelyn, it's Greg. I guess I owe you something more than silence." I sat down on the edge of the bed, heart steady but unsure. I didn't know what he was going to say that night. I should have said something. During, after. I didn't. A pause. I could hear traffic in the background, a horn, a turn signal clicking. I watched you walk out and all I could think about was that time you covered my tuition bill at Wharton, and how I never thanked you. Not properly. The message ended with, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. No pressure. Just here. No apology." Not really. But it wasn't nothing. Later that week, a package arrived. Inside was the telescope, his old one. The plaque still read Gregory Blair, future engineer. But someone had scratched a new line beneath it, not perfectly, but clear for Evelyn. The only one who ever looked up. I didn't cry, but I sat with it for a long time. Maybe not all legacies are passed down. Maybe some are handed back quietly, one piece at a time. I started therapy 3 months after the dinner. Not because of what he said, "You can leave," but because of what I felt after. Emptiness. Not rage, not grief. Just the hollow hush of finally having no one left to prove anything to. The office was small, pale walls, one tall ficus in the corner, and a chair that squeaked if you shifted too much. My therapist's name was Mara. She wore clogs and cardigans and never once used the phrase inner child. At first, I told her about Daniel, about the business, about how much tea I drank, how many hours I worked. It took 4 sessions before I said the word father. When I did, she didn't lean in, didn't blink. She just let the word sit there between us like a photo I'd placed on a table. He always made it clear I wasn't what he ordered, I told her. But I spent years still trying to serve it warm. She wrote nothing down, just nodded once, then said, "And what are you serving now?" The question stunned me. For a long time, I'd lived as someone who waited to be invited, validated, claimed. And now I was learning to sit in rooms without shrinking, to publish stories without needing anyone's last name attached, to say this happened without whispering. There was a day, months later, when Mara offered me the bigger chair. Just for comfort, she said, but I knew what it meant, and I took it. We found out on a Wednesday. I'd felt dizzy folding laundry, and Daniel, half joking, half worried, had stopped by the drugstore on his way home. When the test turned positive, we sat in silence. Not shock, not panic, just awe. He touched my hand lightly. "Whatever happens," he said, "you don't owe anyone a performance." That night I opened a blank notebook. No expectations, no outlines, just the quiet thrill of starting again. We started talking about space. Not metaphorical space, actual space. Walls, floors, cracked windows that wouldn't be enough for winter with a newborn. Portland came up. Daniel had family there. Soft rain, slower streets, a bookstore that already carried Salt-Lite titles. We didn't tell many people. Not yet. I did call Aunt Judith, told her the news. She cried more than I expected. Said my mother would have loved to hold a grandchild. I believed her. Claire sent a text. "Congrats. Hope it's not too late for a do-over." I didn't reply. The lease in Somerville ended quietly. We packed over 2 weeks' books press equipment, teacups, the telescope. I wrapped my mother's pendant in flannel and tucked it in a drawer close to the baby things. One night before we left, Daniel placed his hand on my stomach and whispered, "You're already more seen than I ever was." I knew he wasn't talking to me, but I heard it too. I didn't know he was in the hospital until Claire called. Just a voicemail: "Dad's had a mild stroke. He's stable. Thought you should know." I drove down alone. Daniel stayed with the baby. I told him I wouldn't be long. The hospital was newer than I expected, sterile and quiet with beige curtains and the scent of something too clean to feel safe. He looked smaller in the bed, not fragile, just reduced. I stood by the door for a full minute before stepping in. He was awake, eyes open, alert. He looked at me like I was a neighbor he almost recognized, not surprised, not emotional. We didn't hug. There were no machines beeping dramatically, just the soft rhythm of monitored breathing. I pulled the only chair in the room closer, sat down. We didn't speak for 12 minutes. I counted. At one point, he shifted, looked at me, then at the pendant around my neck. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I waited, but not for an apology, just to see if he'd take the chair across from me. He didn't. Our daughter was born on a cold October morning. We named her Alice after no one in particular, though the name felt like something soft and brave at once. She came into the world wailing and furious. I held her close, whispered nonsense, cried for reasons I'll never entirely be able to name. Daniel placed the telescope by the nursery window, said one day they'd look through it together. In the weeks that followed, the house stayed dim and slow. Bottles, blankets, lullabies hummed out of key. But something inside me steadied. No one was coming to evaluate me. No father, no legacy committee. Just this child looking up, waiting to be met. At 3 weeks old, she stared at me for the first time, really stared. Eyes wide and new, unfiltered. And I realized this was the first time anyone had ever looked at me like that without expectation. No measuring, no grading. Just presence. I didn't promise her I'd be perfect. I didn't write out mantras in a baby book. I just stayed. When she cried, I stayed. When she slept, I stayed. Some nights I sat beside her crib, the moon stretching through the window, and whispered, "I see you." That's enough. Not because someone once told me that, but because no one ever did. And I wasn't going to wait for permission to become the person I needed back then. If no one ever left the door open for you, you learn how to build your own.